Welcome to Beyond the Walls podcast. I'm your host, Kylie, and I am so excited to be able to have this conversation with you to help teach you tools, ideas, support on how to go beyond your walls too. Are you tired of feeling stuck and trapped and like a victim in your own life? Maybe you need to find a new way to look at it. Look at your situation from a different angle. Maybe we need to learn and take a look to see how we can re-choose or recreate a life that is going to bring you joy and purpose and feel free and exciting. So let's get started on today's message. So it is shortly before Christmas. Almost the end of the year. I cannot believe how fast the year is going. What I would love to really talk with you guys about today is how to really start to have meaningful conversations. And most likely you've already either had a lot of holiday parties, you're still getting ready to have them, whether it's work or friends or family. You're going to be spending a lot of time with extended family between Christmas and then we've got New Year's coming up. And I really want to set you up for success on some ways to start to think about how have conversations gone? How do we sort of want to repair maybe some ways that it's gone in the past? And maybe even being able to think about like, how do we freshen up these relationships? I think especially as adults, or we get distracted with all of the things that our kids are doing, or it's really easy to feel like we know everything about these people when really there's so much information we could get to know, or we might actually need to get reminded of. I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm not that old and my kids aren't that old, but even now, like I get conversations from my kids and they're like, hey, remember when this event happened? And I'm like, no. And so my kids are only 11 and 15, right? So it's not like it's been that long ago. But I think it's really funny how easy it is that we either forget certain parts or we forget details, or they might remind us of a situation that we had forgotten about, but we do remember, right? Once it's been reminded. I actually just went and hung out with my sister and a whole group of other single ladies that are about like 10 years younger than me. It was a lot of fun to hang out with people that are not just your age bracket. So just as a side note, definitely go hang out. The intergenerational hang times are very valuable. But we were playing a game, like a get to know you game. And so we were talking about embarrassing moments. And my sister reminded me of one. I cannot tell it to you right now because it is so horrifyingly embarrassing. Maybe someday, but probably not. And so I completely forgot about it, but she reminded me of it. It was my embarrassing situation. And so, oh my gosh, I just died laughing thinking about this moment. But right, in the context of just reminding you that if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, we're going to be stuck having shallow conversations, or I don't know what to talk about with these people, there are so many good nuggets to remind each other about, to think about, to maybe consider like, boy, how can I get to know these people better or in a new way, or maybe a little bit deeper, right? There's ways that we can have meaningful conversations that don't have to be like gut-wrenching trauma or extremely vulnerable, right? Like depending on your level of comfortability or even the safety of the people that you're talking to, the depth of if you're going to actually, are you building a long-term relationship with these people, or is it just, you're having a meal together? You can figure out different degrees and levels of meaningful conversation that is significant and honest, but it can also be something that is really vulnerable and real. And I think what is really cool when we have these moments and we take time to actually get to know people, it's in that space that we really start to have those Me Too moments, right? Like, oh, we have so much in common. Like, I didn't realize that we had some of the similar interests, or maybe we've lived in the same town before, or we've traveled to the same places. We love the same kind of movies or our favorite whatevers, right? There's a lot of areas that we have in common with one another, whether they're lighthearted or deep. But we don't know those things unless we start having some unique and different kind of conversations. So the other thing that I was thinking about is, I was on a podcast as a guest on another podcast. It's called The Parent Project. And it's a really amazing company, and their service is providing support to family members that are having to help take over supporting or managing or needing to assist their elderly parents in their aging process. And it's just a really cool program. So I think if you're, my parents, I'm not quite there right now, but my mom is definitely, my mom and my dad both have parents, my dad's parents have passed away now, but my mom still has her mom. And soon enough, it will be there someday for me, right? It's not there right now, but someday it will be. And I wanted to just kind of talk about that a little bit. I've talked about it in various ways of just, valuing, nurturing those relationships and repairing, and how to really plan to like just start having good conversations with your family members in different episodes. But I think in this time right now, I want to create a possibility for you that if you haven't already experienced it, it's really hard to kind of prepare for something you've never done. We kind of have some ideas, but especially if you're still young enough that even like your peers haven't started in being in that space yet. Like, I don't know that a lot of my really close peers, they're either my age or younger, they haven't needed to start taking care of their elderly parents yet. And so it's in this space that we can kind of just start getting curious about what would we want it to look like. And honestly, I feel like Christmas is the best time to just get curious, because most likely you're going to be with your aunts and uncles, the other older people in your family that are going to start needing to take care of their parents and your grandparents. And so being able to just, the best part to me about being curious is that it's not an accusation. It's not conflict. It's not fighting. It shouldn't be fear triggering, right? At least like not in a confrontational way where someone's actually being triggered by you and just being curious. And so when we can be in this environment where we have multiple generations, and you kind of just, now that you're an adult, you're no longer sitting at the kids' table, most likely, right? You're not just with your cousins or with your sibling set, but look around the room and think about, get curious about, be in a space of learning and growing, to just observe and take them in from a new perspective. How much do you really know about all of those other adults in the room, about what their life was like, what their hopes and dreams were, how's their life doing now, right? Like there's a lot of things to be stressed about or to celebrate. Like it's not all doom and gloom, but there's a lot of things to just get to know them as individuals, right? Putting the humanity on all of your family members. And I think especially if you're in the space where you're not immediately responsible for taking care of your parents yet, what you do have the opportunity right now is starting to watch as those family members start going through that, right? Think about like, what were your great grandparents? How did their funeral go? How did they die? How was the experience on the other family members? What kind of tension did it bring up? What fighting or division did it bring? What are the facts surrounding those relationships and those dynamics? What were the things that made it difficult, right? Was it financial or emotional? Maybe was there some kind of secret family trauma that nobody dealt with, and now there's just parts of family members that are completely cut off, and we don't know them at all. If you can use that as information to not shame, fear, accuse, right? Like it doesn't have to have any meaning on anybody's value. You're not making any decisions right now. There's no boundaries that have to be laid. But even on that note, like if there are boundaries, maybe just start to ask again about why are the boundaries where they are? Why are we in this situation? Why is the dynamic the way that it is right now? Because the valuable place that you have right now, that I feel so blessed to have, and I genuinely feel like it happened accidentally. Like maybe it was God, like it just lined up this way, but I didn't seek it out. I didn't know that it was happening, but I'm very aware that it did happen. And I'm super grateful for it right now. Is that I had a front row seat of watching 3 generations ahead of me while kind of the caretaking intensity grew, right? So I have my mom who's watching her mom take care of her mom. And as a teenager, my great grandmother passed away when I was about 19 or 20, I think. And so I wasn't really, I certainly wasn't an adult. Like the way that I would be thinking right now and the way I would have interacted with my great grandma is completely different than I related to her as a 13-year-old, right? That makes sense. So I can imagine for you, like, are you thinking about like, how old were you when a great grandparent passed away, or a grandparent, or, the older generation who is left? How involved were you? Did you have a front row seat? Were you observing how your family members took care of it, right? I think that's one of the things that I feel also I haven't personally had to experience yet, but I've heard so many times about just the fighting and the division and the anger and the just the greed, the all kinds of just really unfortunate, disunifying conversations, dynamics that come up with family members in those end of year times. Right. And especially if there's a lot of siblings, like all of your aunts and uncles, like who's going to make the medical decisions? Who's going to decide and manage the money? What happens to the estate, right? Like all of these things that have to get dealt with are just overwhelming. And it's so easy for them to not go well. So before I digress into all the like sadness, I'm not trying to be a downer here right before Christmas, but I'm just like, hopefully if you're not in the depths of like that pain and misery right now, and if you are, I definitely feel for you. And there's definitely way more to talk about and lots of conversations to have. And I'm here for you for however way that I can support you, kind of just emotionally, and really owning how do you manage and kind of look beyond that challenging situation to start planning for the future. But if you're not there yet, I think this is really, this is good news. This is like an amazing opportunity where you get to choose to intentionally start just preparing, creating, considering of like what might be coming down the road someday. And to start nurturing the relationships right now to set you up for success the best you can later. And that's something that came out a lot in the conversation that I was having as a guest was, oftentimes there's situations where if we have not dealt, let's say we're still in a relationship with our parents or our grandparents or aunts and uncles or our siblings even, and we have not even started having honest, real conversations about areas that need repair, areas that might need forgiveness, areas that might need some unity, or to even just be brought into the light, right? If we have a lot of skeletons in the closet or resentment, or we're harboring unforgiveness, or there just is a tense relationship, but you're still actively with them, but you haven't started dealing with them, it will only get worse when there's a true like medical emergency, or when parents start aging and they need to move, right? They need to downsize, they need to change their home, they need, like, there's so much about their life that they need help. It's appropriate for the next generation to come in and step in and help, right? But depending on the relationship of the siblings, right? Your aunts and uncles with your parents, are they all going to be fighting? Are they going to do it together? Is somebody going to lead the ship? Are the others going to follow? Or is it going to just be this big contentiousness? And so, what you have as the opportunity by just observing and understanding what is currently the situation right now, thinking about how it might potentially go, you have the opportunity right now to repair down. You get to start deciding, like, boy, what set this family up? What set up my generations before me to be in this situation in the first place? Was it somebody just being super prideful and they weren't able to do any work? They're a narcissist, they're too insecure, right? Like they're just tight-lipped and they weren't ever able to really open up because they grew up in this generation where you don't talk about anything real and you keep all of the things to yourself and you just show up and look right, but you don't really talk about anything. If that's where you came from, is that what you want next? Is that what you want for you and your children when you are in need of being taken care of in your elderly age? What kind of kids are coming up to take care of you? What about your siblings? Like, who is your support system going to be if things don't change? Because the thing about it is, I think, and it's obvious and it shows up as parents, right? We can think about, like, as me being a parent, if we don't intentionally choose to parent differently, we will just naturally do what our parents did to us, right? We might have liked it, we might not have, but there's so many things that we just, that nurture that came into us that we just like, oh man, the things just trigger us the same way, right? I'm sure you've been having these moments and you're like, oh my gosh, something comes out of your mouth and you're like, I sound just like my mom. That is totally what my mom said to me when I was growing up. Like, that sounds familiar. Sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't. But if we don't start really putting some intention behind it, we have a choice. We don't have to go down that same path. We're not forced to. We are not automatically imprisoned with doing the status quo. And so when you're together at the Christmas gathering this year, what if you just decided to first just get awareness? Now that you're an adult, and let's say, like, my grandmother passed 20 some years ago, I could be having conversations that with my grandma now that was just like, hey, tell me more about Mimi. Tell me more about, what was she like? What was it like for you when she passed away? What stage of life were you in? How hard was the impact? Um, what do you wish, like, do you have any regrets of how it went down? Like, I mean, and you could even get really nitty gritty if they're open to talking and it's not a super sensitive kind of topic. But I mean, you could start to really ask, like, man, like, how do I even just set myself up financially? Like, did she have enough money? Did insurance cover it? Like, if you could have gone back and done it differently, like, how would you have prepared for it better? Or, or did it go the way you expected it to? And so as you're looking at every generation down, right, then you get to start having this conversation with your direct parents and your direct siblings and planting the seed. Right? Like, if we're just thinking about planting seeds and nurturing for the long term, what would it look like? What could be different? Could you get them maybe on board that's like, hey, you know what? Boy, remember when our aunt and uncles and they all fought and it was just this really big traumatic thing? Could we, like, how about we don't do that? Like, what would it look like for it to not go down that way? And we can't prevent every upset, and so much of life is unpredictable, right? And you may have already lost a family member that's super close. You might have lost a sibling or a parent already. And so, but they aren't the last person you're going to lose, right? And so I think even if that was something that you've already experienced it, but knowing that it won't be the last. And so really being able to take time to think about, like, boy, how did it go for me? What would I want it to be different? And being able to use that time, use this space to plant those seeds and nurture something different then? How am I going to need to set my immediate family up for success to change that generational trauma, to change that generational upset and fight and that rigid thinking or this it has to be this way or else kind of a thing. And so I think when we can look at those, right, as meaningful conversations, that's a really specific way to think about like with your the older generation in your family and the extended family, right? And if they're not safe people or you've never done it before, or you're like, I could never ask those questions. I challenge you then, if you at least entered the room with a curious listening, right? Maybe you're not ready to start asking questions and inquiring, but start listening from a different space. Start listening to them, not from your judgment, not from I already know yous, not from like, that's so and so, that's how they always show up, right? If you were just a fly on the wall, watch your uncles, aunts, and uncles talk to each other. How do they talk to each other? How often do they talk to each other outside of the holidays? How does the dynamic go with grandma, right? Like there's a lot we can understand when we're looking for it. And I think certainly at Christmas time, it's not the time to start fights. It's not the time to start, bringing up all kinds of family trauma, unless that's something that you really feel like is what's best for your family at this time, right? Like maybe you'll end up having this one side conversation that doesn't have to go all the way to it involving all of the conversation, but maybe it's time to start it. Maybe you just start to like just ask one little question. Maybe it's you bring up a memory that you have or remembering a positive memory and being like, boy, you know what? When I think back to Christmas time, like I loved it when you made these particular cookies. You always made me feel special. I remember this present that you got me, right? And that's kind of back to those full circle, right? When my kids tell me things and I'm like, I don't remember that, but I love that you remembered it and you're happy about it, right? Imagine if we just went around and like told our aunts and uncles and our grandparents and maybe even our parents and just remembered a positive memory. Let's go back and be like, boy, remember that one Christmas and we did this one thing together. I think that's something I lost my cousin a long time ago. He was really young. He was in the army and he died over in Iraq. And I think of him often. I'm not super close to my aunt and my uncle, his mom and dad. Like we're friendly for sure, but we've always lived far apart geographically. We don't personally talk to each other. Like I don't usually just call them up and have my own conversation with them. But when we are together, I feel like I like to connect with them in some way, or at least I reach out to them on his birthday or, those anniversary moments and just tell them how much I loved spending time with my cousin and the fun memories that we had together. Right. So maybe it's not time to start like opening up old wounds, but you could at least start nurturing positive memories, those connections and being able to just open the door to help people's guards to come down, to have lots of loving conversation that's meaningful, right? It doesn't have to be hostile, but it can still be deep. It can be honest. It can be real. And so whether you're asking questions of others or you're bringing it up for yourself, that's like, man, I really loved this about you. Or I spent this whole summer with you. Like, what was your life like then? Right. I think even just honestly asking those conversations, that's like, what was your first job? What did you think you wanted to be growing up when you were in high school? What was your first car? How did you learn how to drive? Who taught you? Right. Because even generation to generation, driver's ed and all the tests and the permits and right, like all of those things change throughout time. And so those are completely non-threatening conversations that still could bring up some really interesting information outside of it, right? That can be like, let me get to know you from a different angle, from a different perspective. And I think the more that we spend that time having nurturing conversations with the intention of building a closer, safer connection, preparing yourself for the life you want to have when you get there, right? Like, we can't prevent all the upsets. We can't design a perfect life that doesn't have any frustrations, or like it's just going to go perfect, right? But how intentional can we be about it? How secure could we be? How could we start planning the time and the character and the investment that we want to have in each other right now, before the crisis, before the emergency, before the unexpected turn of events, so that we can be that much more prepared, because it will happen. And that was one of the big things that I really heard when I was being interviewed, was that one of the challenging things about taking care of our elderly parents is that if we, like, it's going to come whether we want it to or not. And one of the things that we can do right now is to start preparing ourselves emotionally and nurturing the relationship. Because when those things just get undealt with, they're ignored, they're minimized, it is only going to make a hard situation harder. Like, taking care of our elderly parents is going to be hard. It's going to be unfamiliar because we've never done it before, most likely. And even if we've experienced it with another parent or a grandparent, we are all very different people. We are going to be a different person by the time that happens. And so if you've had more than one child, like, every pregnancy is completely different. And so no two deaths are exactly the same. No grieving is the same for each individual. Just because we grieved in this one particular way, or it went really poorly this one time, it doesn't mean it's always going to be difficult. And it doesn't always mean it's going to look exactly the way it looked before. And so I think leaving room, and I think especially if you've had hard conversations with family members, or it's gone poorly, or it's just been hostile and negative, right? Like, be willing that maybe this year's a year to try again, right? And if we come from a space where we really are just trying to get to know them as a human being, nurture a loving relationship, we're not trying to accuse them of anything, we're not coming in guns blazing, right? Give them and you the gift of just being together, of being able to have some encouraging conversation, some collaborative conversation, a two-way conversation, right? Where you can just get to know them in a new way like you haven't before. And so be willing to try again, even if it didn't go well before, or they're sensitive to whatever kind of conversations, then bring up different ones, right? And I think if you are really wanting to do this, but you get really insecure or worried about how you're going to respond, or you're tempted to make it mean something about you, I definitely encourage you to grab my free guide that I have. It's called Unlock Relationship Security. And what it will definitely do for you as well is, if you do it now, it will sign you up for my 12 days of emails, the 12 days of Christmas. And I have broken down and given you guys each a little nugget for each day leading up to Christmas, of just things to start intentionally preparing your mind. They're not long and not overwhelming, because I know that life is so busy right now, but it's got a couple of journal prompts in there, and some thoughts to think about. They're around, like, boundaries and finding the joy again, being present, turning your upsets into growth, right? Like, how can we choose to turn those breakdowns into a breakthrough? Managing our mind, managing our upsets, realistic expectations. And so I would definitely encourage you to go grab that so that you can receive those. And I would love to hear from you anytime, to know what kind of conversations you want me to talk about on here. If you have a guest in mind that you think would be great for the podcast, or if maybe you have an amazing story, you could be a guest as well. I love having this as a platform for people, especially when I have guests, to share their stories, to share their victories, to share the walls that they've overcome. And it's an amazing space to be able to just connect with one another, to remember that we are not alone, that you're not the only one that has felt a particular way, and that there are lots of people that are willing to come alongside you, to love you, support you. And if it's not your immediate family, there are other people available. Keep looking until you find them. And in the meantime, the best thing you can do is just keep growing on yourself. Keep taking personal responsibility for you. Keep being intentional with what you're building and what you're nurturing. Change the generations behind you by changing yourself. It's the best place to start. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that brought you a lot of encouragement and some information to be able to apply to your own life and to start taking down those walls that are in your way. What is that one thing that you want to take on and take with you today? I would love to hear from you and to hear about it. Follow me here on the podcast so that you're alerted and don't miss any upcoming episodes. You can find me on Instagram or even on my website at beyondthewallspodcast.com. If you want more help, I offer one-on-one coaching and would love to connect with you. Until next time, have a great day.